Welcome to our presentation on some sharing of interim data that we'd like to show you of the CanTeC-19 study. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the land upon which McMaster teaches and learns is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. The territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the lands protected under the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. The CanTeC study is about how Canadian teenagers are experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm Deb Sloboda. I'm the lab scientist and professor at McMaster University in the Department of Biochemistry and Biomedical Sciences. My personal scientific program is focused on how pregnancy affects health and development beyond pregnancy, and also on impacts in adolescent health and well-being. And I launched this CanTeC study a year ago with this amazing team. This team really is made up of some very dedicated researchers, students, and community people that are invested in making sure that our adolescents were healthy and trying to give back to our adolescents during these really hard times. I want to especially acknowledge Dr. Lysidra McCarricker. She led the project really and dedicated quite a bit of her, not just her professional time, but her personal time to this endeavor. We also had a close relationship with the Art Gallery of Hamilton, where Sarah Dickinson, the Education Outreach Director, helped us to form art workshops where we could give back to our adolescents. And everyone else on that screen that you see there has really committed over and above what was ever expected of any student at McMaster University to engage and help us help the youth of Hamilton. The CanTeC-19 project is embedded within a global network of TeC-19 research projects, where the initial TeC-19 project began in the United Kingdom. And there, my colleagues and collaborators reached out to me to see if we would join them in a global network of understanding how COVID-19 is impacting teenagers around the world. Among other countries are noted here, and we are very much looking forward to sharing what we've learned over the last year with these other countries and forming a global understanding of how COVID-19 has impacted our youth. So what was our plan when we began? It was to talk to teens through focus groups. It was to ask them specific questions about what they've been doing over the last year and how it's impacted their lives. And we also aim to give back via art workshops through our connection at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. And our goal was to learn about teens' health and experiences while offering them healthy outlets for their feelings and an opportunity to receive support. So what data have we collected? We have collected an immense amount of data through hours of focus group conversations. Here we talk to an unbelievable set of youth that have given us generously their time during a really stressful time in their lives. And we really appreciate every participant that helped us to understand what they were going through at this time. Here they shared their feelings and, requests of resources, and also their impressions on what could have been managed better during the pandemic. So we're incredibly grateful to everyone who did that for us and has given their time. We also had over 500 respondents to our online anonymous survey that asked questions on who they were, where they were, what they were doing and eating, how they were feeling, and some of the social supports that they were seeking. And again, we're incredibly grateful to everyone that has helped form the data set that we have now, where we can learn and how we can learn to improve our connection with youth. And finally, we engaged in art workshops, using art as a medium to engage and connect. And here participants got to work with two amazing artists from the city of Hamilton, online, virtually, to express themselves in new ways. So today's agenda is to tell you a little bit about who we spoke to and what we learned from them, what we learned about their challenges to teen health, and what we learned about the opportunities and silver linings that were embedded in some of the conversations that we had with our teens. We also want to discuss next steps. We have some next steps already underway. And we also want to talk to you about what some recommendations might be going forward. So just as an overview of what our journey has been over the last year through the pandemic, most of us will have a hard time forgetting where we began in March 2020, but this is a time when the UK CanTeC-19 study launched, and they reached out to me and asked me if I would form a Canadian arm of the study. And so that's what we did. We started our first set of online focus groups by the fall, where we recruited youth of Hamilton to join us and talk to us about how it was going through the pandemic for the first phase of the pandemic. And then we launched an online workshop later that year. We then formed a really close collaboration with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, and they were generous enough to advertise our online anonymous workshop through their connections, and also to recruit youth through the school board to enter some more focus groups so we could increase our outreach throughout Hamilton. We also found towards the end of the school year this year in 2021 that youth were really stressed and really suffering. So we felt like at that time we really needed to give back. So we put together a wellness workshop where teens were able to engage in some art-based expression work, and some journaling online with a Hamilton artist. Again, they're a really great collaboration with the Art Gallery of Hamilton. And we also launched a survey asking youth what they thought about vaccinations, what they thought about the messaging around vaccinations, and where they got their information from. And of course, going forward, we've got lots of data collection and a big wrap up to do. So the analysis that we're going to be presenting to you today really is an interim analysis. We've got a lot more to do. Right, so I'm going to pass over the actual data presentation to quite a formidable research scientist, Dr. Lucidra McCarricher. She really led the project and has done an incredible amount of work over the last year and dedicated both professional and personal time to this project. And I'm grateful to have her as a colleague and a member of this team. So I'm going to hand it over to her, and she's going to walk you through our interim analysis. Over to you, Lucidra.
So, as mentioned, we got roughly 530 fairly complete survey responses from unique individuals. And while we're sure there's some selection bias in who responded, the range of representation by key demographic indicators isn't terrible. As you can see on the top left here, the survey respondents represent the full range of teen ages from 13 to 19, although those of high school age are overrepresented. That is, those who are mostly ages 14 to 15, shown in purple, or 16 to 17, shown in orange. The bottom left pie chart emphasizes this point even more, showing that 84% of survey respondents were in high school at the time of response. Moving over to the right side of the screen, the online focus groups really overrepresent the perspectives of those in their last year or two of high school, or their first year of being out of high school. So nearly 60% of the discussion group participants are ages 16 to 17, that is around grade 11, 12, shown in orange, and almost all the rest are 18 to 19, meaning grade 12 or their first year out of high school, in maroon. You can see the same rough pattern in the education graph on the bottom right, with close to 3/4 in high school, and we know from the age distribution chart that most of these are in the highest grades. Okay, a little bit more on who participated. So we didn't ask about gender per se, but we did ask for folks' pronouns. And if you look at the survey figure on the top left, 53%, or just over half of survey respondents, used exclusively she, her, hers pronouns, and 27% used exclusively he, him, his. 12% either actively refused the question by writing in a comment or skipped this question while answering almost all the others. And 8% used exclusively or combined non-binary pronouns like they, them. To the extent that pronouns map onto gender, most survey respondents were girls or young women. Looking over the top right, you can see this pattern is even more exaggerated in the focus groups, where fully 75% use she, her pronouns, and only 19% use he, him. Non-binary folks, however, are represented similarly between the survey and the focus groups at 8% and 6%, respectively. Okay, so let's move on to self-identified social race or ethnicity. Survey respondents mostly identified as white, shown in royal blue on the left, but 30% identified with one or more groups who are likely to be racialized. Importantly, this breakdown resembles Hamilton's composition generally, which is also around 3% non-white or visible minority. The focus group participants are only 51% white, and I think it's worth noting now that nearly a quarter identify with one or more East or Southeast Asian groups, a point we might pick up on again near the end of the discussion if we had time. So that was who responded, which is important, but assuming the survey and the focus groups represent a wide range of teen experiences and perspectives, which it seems likely that they do, what we really want to know is what are some of the main health challenges teens are facing? At the center of all the pandemic-related challenges teens are facing are some big disruptions to mental health and well-being. This chart here shows you changes through time and average scores on a validated mental health assessment tool that was part of the survey we used. The tool is a population health tool, definitely not a clinical diagnostic one for things like depression and anxiety. So these categories you see here are rough interpretations based on the distributions of the data. They are not diagnoses. One other little note of caution before I walk through this chart is that the different chunks of time, that is each little cluster of multicolored bars, have wildly different sample sizes. If you look at the ends down at the bottom of the screen, where, like, for example, second wave begins, N is approximately 20, return to lockdown, N is approximately 370, and so on. And the structured reopening chunk on the far right is really, really small. So really don't put a lot of stock in these data. We think of them as mostly highlighting some things that we're going to want to drill into with more sophisticated analyses as we move forward. Anyway, what I want to share here with this particular figure is that the lower scores in red represent the percentage of participants who responded to the survey during a given time period, felt pretty well, had the energy to talk, to work, to do the stuff they like with their friends, to go about their days. The maroon bars are the percentage of respondents in a given time period who are really having a tough time coping, maybe even with getting out of bed and doing the most basic daily activities. The two middle score ranges in orange and purple are the percentage of folks at a given time slice who are maybe a bit stressed out or worried or grumpy or lonely or frustrated, but probably not so much that they're in a state of distress or dysfunction. We can see here that all the way through the study, there's about 30% of respondents who are in the bright red group and are basically doing just fine, regardless of whether it's the beginning of the second wave, the winter 2020 lockdown, etc. When we look at the other 70%, though, shown in purple, orange, and maroon, you can see that most of these respondents are in the purple group, so only moderately stressed in fall of 2020 when district schools and many businesses and activities were open. But then much higher percentages begin to fall into the seriously stressed and above groups, the orange and maroon groups, by the beginning of 2021, which is where we've got a return to lockdown coming out of winter break, and lots of culminations in exam stress for high school students towards the end of January. And then this higher level of orange and red and lower level of purple persists through the spring third wave. So the survey data basically show that stress and related mental health issues were big challenges for folks whenever there were high caseloads and when teens were pretty cut off from their supports and their routines. We heard this qualitatively in our January, February, and March, April 2021 focus groups, as well as in open-ended survey responses from this time. Just so much frustration, stress, and anxiety about school, about illness, about responsibility for vulnerable family members and friends, for having too much responsibility for managing customers at essential jobs. Many of them are, of course, essential. Maybe we don't treat them as such for the essential jobs that teenagers work. A few examples of mental health challenges in participants' own words. Lockdown has almost ruined my life, feels like a prison. I lost a lot of friends and feel like I'm in a never-ending depression. It sucks that I'm probably losing the best years of my life and I'll never get them back. I'm miserable. Knowing how stressed school made me back then made me feel more stressed because it was so difficult. It made me not look forward to the next school year because like, I'm just going to go through this all again. And in the most extreme case, somebody who actually dropped out of school, he said, or they said, cancellation of in-class schoolwork is the reason I left secondary school. So it's been really hard. Part of the story here around these mental health challenges is, of course, systemic stuff around lack of the right kinds of support and accommodations, but there is also a little bit of an individual health behavior component as well. I won't show you the details of the analyses here, but we're working on a statistical model that seems like it accounts for just over 45% of variation in these mental health assessment scores that I just showed you in the previous slide, as well as again here. And whereas about half of that variation comes from sociodemographic factors like respondents' age, gender, and self-identified social race, the other half is down to how much sleep respondents are reporting getting, how much physical activity they're doing. And I can't emphasize the physical activity piece enough. Eating, of course, might matter too. But we've done some analyses that make it seem like variations in diet are mostly about food security. So the diet stuff may be more structural than about the behaviors of individual teenagers or their families. So we're going to leave diet and zoom in a little bit on sleep and exercise. We just want to highlight quickly the picture around sleep and sleep disruptions. This figure shows that less than half of adolescents were not getting within the recommended 8 to 10 hours per night of sleep for healthy adolescents, and that this is the case for almost all periods of the study. It was especially bad news in January, February, and March, April, highlighted here in this maroon square or rectangle, where most respondents were getting very little sleep or really disturbed sleep. From focus groups, we heard it was because participants were staying up really late to work on homework, and then to try to fit in just a tiny bit of virtual social activity, they were staying up into the wee hours of the night after they were done their homework because they so badly craved contact from their friends or partners. And we know from mental health data from loads of other countries, this is bad news for all-round well-being. As one survey respondent wrote in about sleep disturbance and what teens are processing through all of this, I've been really having vivid nightmares about suffering from COVID alone and in isolation. And this just really illustrates beautifully how sleep is tangled up with stress and distress and grief and loneliness. Okay, staying here in the sort of the vein of health behaviors, we're just going to touch for one moment here on how the whole way through the study, most CanTeC participants were not getting anywhere close to the recommended amount of physical activity. And just to remind you, it's recommended that that adolescents get, like adults, should get about 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity every single day. So these teal bars are the percentage of respondents in a given time period who got less than 15 minutes of any kind of physical activity the day before responding to the survey. So that's a plurality in all time periods. It's pretty hard to be healthy and happy and strong and engaged at any age if you don't connect with your body in some way for even 15 minutes a day. So much the bleaker of a picture for teens who are forming health habits and developing their body images. And again, physical activity was a really strong predictor of that mental health assessment tool score we looked at earlier. So to us, this extreme lack of physical activity for so many participants looks like a bit of a crisis. This slide was made by Tavishi Wiratna and Jordan Chin, two CanTeC research assistants. And they made this based on focus group themes, but I decided to present it here as a recap to this section on what health challenges were participants facing, because it actually perfectly encapsulates the survey trends through time as well. Both the qualitative and quantitative data tell more or less the same story. So in fall, winter 2020, as in through the beginning and crest of the second wave, we're hearing about disruption of sleep, exercise, and diet. Some participants find the lack of accountability in school settings I forgot to advance the slide. School setting, challenging, but they're also generally managing and are generally optimistic about trying to find ways to live their lives somewhat normally. Then in December 2020 to January 2021, we're getting into the return to lockdowns, where we hear more about worries about exposure to COVID-19, feelings of burnout and exhaustion, and confusion about the mixed messaging from the government, from public health, from other authorities, and frustration at the government's COVID-19 responses. And in March 2020, February, March 2020, reopening to emergency break time period, focus group participants and survey respondents seem to be feeling an increase in their senses of isolation, loneliness, and boredom. Continued worry about getting or spreading COVID-19, feeling overwhelmed by and tired of COVID-19 related information. April, May 2020, even though the third wave is in full swing, vaccinations are really starting to kick into gear and be available to the general population, which is having a direct impact on many teens' lives. So morale seems to be slightly higher. Many participants are continuing to talk about lack of support from work and school, but doing better generally. And a big theme, so they're really wanting by this stage, by sort of mid-spring, more opportunities to connect with their friends and their peers. It's been a long time and it's getting harder and harder and less patient. Moving into structured reopening, so these are data from June, July 2021, participants and respondents are more optimistic about the future and more positive about their daily situations, but they're still cautious about going out, about traveling, about interacting, and they have mixed feelings about online schooling versus in-person schooling for the upcoming year. So those feelings of cautious optimism emerging from the summer data leads us nicely into asking our next question, which is, what are some of the silver linings and opportunities for teens that emerged through the pandemic? Okay, these are survey data. And on the x-axis on the bottom, we've got how participants rate their recalled overall life satisfaction prior to the pandemic on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the worst possible life for someone their age and 10 is the best, just as sort of like a baseline measure for all of the survey respondents. On the y-axis, we've got a measure that we might call something like resilience and optimism or hopefulness. Generally, overall life satisfaction pre-pandemic, so that's again on the x-axis, is a decent predictor of resilience. But here is the exciting thing. If you look at that red rectangle, the size and shape of the dots here, if you look at how most of the dots in that rectangle, which fall above the blue trend line, they're disproportionately larger dots and they're disproportionately lighter color dots. What those large light colored dots represent folks that were getting out in nature at least a few times a week. And this is to show you that those bigger dots are way overrepresented above the general trend line, suggesting that more engagement with nature is associated with more hopefulness, regardless of where you started out pre-pandemic in your perspective on life, your life satisfaction. And when we model it and control for other things like age, gender, social race, food security, etc., we still get this relationship. So these data certainly show that it's worth investigating whether we can make a difference, maybe a big difference in teens' lives through the pandemic and beyond by supporting them through school and other big structures to engage more with nature. Another possible silver lining that came through in both the open-ended questions to the survey and the focus groups is that the stress of the pandemic, the huge chunks of time afforded by stay-at-home orders, these encourage some folks to actually do some reflection and soul searching, and actually like quite a lot of the respondents, or to experiment with how they use their time in ways that they'll probably be better for in the long run. For example, one participant wrote, "During the lockdown, I co-created a garden with my boyfriend and sold local produce at a farmer's market." A second really poignant one was that after seeing how nothing is really guaranteed, my time spent is more aligned with my goals and interests rather than the goals of others. And this last one, super touching, said, I realize how I took my family for granted. So the time I've spent with them, I cherish because I've realized that anyone's life can easily be taken away. A special example of this new discovery and new priorities theme is around creating art through the art workshops that we provided. And one participant wrote to us after an art wellness workshop and said, I really love this process. I've never thought of myself as a good visual artist, but this particular method feels like it has room for the imperfection and organic work, which is really cool. I think I may seriously start an art journal now. This reevaluating of priorities in general is especially clear with respect to human relationships. We heard lots and lots of people say things about finding out who their real friends were or who they could count on during the pandemic. In the quantitative survey data, we found that both respondents who got to see friends in person at least once a week and those who lived with family who they actually talked to were generally better off, more optimistic than those who didn't talk to people in person. So this chart is set up in the same way as that one that I showed you with nature a minute ago, with pre-pandemic overall life satisfaction on the x-axis down at the bottom, and as pre-pandemic life satisfaction increases, you can see the general trend is that resilience and optimism on the y-axis also increase, which is what we'd expect. But those folks that have in-person connections with friends and family, they are generally doing better than you'd expect based on their pre-pandemic overall life satisfaction. They're more resilient, more hopeful, suggesting that it's worth doing whatever we can to support teenagers to have at least some in-person contacts in sort of in a harm-reduced way. And the teens themselves said similar things. In one participant's words, I hate not being able to see my family and friends. I even hate not being able to go to school in person. I never thought I would miss school so much. And in others, and I love this, I think my family has become my safety blanket. Now, one last thing that came up again and again as a source of resilience, a reason to get up in the morning, something to motivate some physical activity, is pets. In most focus groups, there was some mention of pets, and there were at least 50 spontaneous write-in responses to the open-ended questions in the survey about cats, dogs, horses, birds, and pets in general. Here's just a few examples, and I'm just going to read one because I don't want to take forever. I have a lot of pets, this person writes. Caring for them keeps me busy and helps me stay positive. This pet finding made me think that it's worth thinking about how to make access to pets and opportunities for pet and animal care a bit more equitable, like in schools, for example. Just to recap, reflecting on the data we collected and looking forward into a new school year, we identified three main sources of resilience and optimism for participants. First, some teens took the time given by stay at home as a chance for reflection and reevaluation and emerge with new understandings of themselves and with new priorities. So while we obviously don't want to be in an emergency brake mode on a regular basis, this is a reminder that some, maybe even most, teens can benefit from slowing things down a bit once in a while. Secondly, the data point towards immense value of connecting with nature when trying to be a functional young person in a really challenging time, and maybe all the time. Third, the data show that talking in person to friends and family is associated with something that might be called resilience. And this might result in some new relationship structures and priorities and some new emphasis on caring, including with pets. Lastly, at least anecdotally, it seems like some teens really benefit from being encouraged or offered channels to express themselves and to reflect on their experiences creatively with their hands, with color, just for themselves. And this is surely something we can look to with a sense of hope. On that note, I will pass you over to some of our other presenters.
Following the results of our studies and the focus groups specifically, our team wanted to enhance the mental health of youth, not only those who were engaged with our study, but also beyond that in the community. So we really wanted to take our research one step further.
So So this essentially led us to our evidence-based guide to wellness, which we have begun drafting together as a guidebook, which essentially highlights the different themes that appear to be an area of concern for teenagers' mental health within Hamilton. So as you can see here, a couple of examples. So components of making a routine and managing your screen time. And we essentially wanted this to be a resource in which our research is being implemented to enhance the community health.
Our 7 chapters in this book include youth-friendly tips and suggestions focused on routine, sleep hygiene, environmental wellness, screen time, nutrition, physical activity, mindfulness, finding your passion, and resources for further material. The book is roughly around 80 pages thus far, and we hope to distribute hard copies of the guidebook to all participants, including to the individuals at the Hamilton School Board and teens absolutely everywhere.
Thanks to Vichy, Jordan, and Shania for that great overview of the guidebook that you guys have been instrumental in putting together, and that we hope to have out to at least some of our participants and our community members. So, based on all these data, do we have any recommendations? Well, certainly what we plan on doing is formulating strategies and policies with the people that we've engaged with and with our communities and the public health workers in Hamilton. What we'd like to do is to work alongside the school board, who's been instrumental in helping us with our recruitment. We'd like to obviously collaborate with Hamilton community groups, specifically those who engage youth in Hamilton, and for certain public health, because we want to work with all of you to share what we've learned and certainly share the results of our full analysis, because this is only our interim analysis at the present time. And then eventually we hope to formulate some sort of strategies on an international level to find out really what our Canadian youth have been experiencing compared to other youth around the world. So we will eventually have all these data ready to share both on our website and to those of you who would like me to speak to you specifically. But really, in terms of recommendations, I feel like we shouldn't be offering you recommendations based on data. What we should be doing is telling you what we heard and what we have heard from the teens that we've spoken to. And what we've heard is that they want improved academic structure. They want more feedback regarding school schedules and assistance for independent learning. They want to be accommodated in terms of sleep schedules, social, and specifically activities that are out in nature, because we've heard that activity and nature are 2 main things that help our youth through this pandemic. Teens want more support. They want more support for their classes. They want more support for beyond their classes and preparing for university. A lot of our youth are heading to other things like other post-secondary applications, like jobs. They want some flexible due dates and advocates for them. And most importantly, they want peer support. The focus groups really helped a lot of our teens through the pandemic. Finally, they'd like to have more accessible health messaging. They'd like to understand what's happening around them about vaccinations and health-related information. And they actually suggested that a centralized information hub on social media that's run by teens would be a wonderful source of real factual information. So I'll stop there and thank you all for tuning into this video and listening to us share what we've heard and what we've learned over the last year, talking to youth, specifically in the city of Hamilton, over the course of the pandemic year that we've had. I want to specifically and really graciously thank all the CanTeC-19 participants who have taken their time during really, really stressful periods of their life to talk to us and express to us the barriers that they felt and provide us with some insight into how they've been coping. Thank you so much for all the participants. And also those who have completed our anonymous survey. I want to I want to thank the artists Kelly Wolf and Nancy Benoit who are Hamilton artists, local Hamilton artists, who took time out of their busy schedules to help us offer art to the youth so that they can better express themselves or express themselves in another way. I want to thank Sarah Dickinson from the Art Gallery of Hamilton, who was instrumental in helping us form these workshops from the beginning. Of course, thank HWGSB for their support in recruitment and setting out information to the youth in their board. Thank you so much to McMaster University for providing us with seed funding so that we could run this study. That's been really graciously received, and we hope to publish a lot of what we have found in scientific journals, and more importantly, form policy type documents in collaboration with some of the community workers that I named earlier. Finally, the international CanTeC team, thank you. Without them reaching out to us, we wouldn't have done this study, and we would have learned so much about what's happening in Canadian or Hamilton youth. And finally, thank you so much to Vanessa Parlett, the community advisor, in guiding us through this process. So thank you again for your patience, for listening. Thank you for your interest in youth and how they've been coping. And I hope that if you have any questions at all, you can reach me through McMaster University. You can find me there, Deborah Sloboda. You can also take a look at our website at www.CanTeC19.org, where we will post information as we go. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter, so you can find us there at CanTeC19. Please reach out if you have any questions and you'd like to share anything at all with us. And until then, thank you very much and stay safe.